Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about the updates to the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, which was announced just a couple days ago. I am bringing you to this from Artifact Academy. My name is Neon, and I'll be walking you through this. So, first off, give a little bit of background about my enthusiasm for the topic of card game economics. I've been writing about the subject now for over a year. I've had a lot of articles out on RNG Eternal on the subjects. This is one of my biggest ones that I wrote, was comparing the economics of a whole bunch of different card games that were digital card games that were out on the market. When Magic the Gathering Arena's economy was revealed, it got a lot of interest from me because it clearly am interested in the subject generally, and I felt that there were some interesting facets to it because it had a very different approach compared to many other games. This led to the series of articles, both on more of the opinion side of what is the structure of this economy and how do I feel about it. What does it mean for the experience of the player, subjective experience point of view, but then also how long is it going to take to actually build good collections. So the most recent article that I wrote, of course, on this came out just a couple of days ago at the time that I'm recording this, and this was a response to the Dominaria update to the Magic the Gathering Arena economy. That was very poorly received by the community in terms of not liking the update to the economy. So the objectives of that article were to first off give accurate estimates of how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost to build decks. Compare this to the last update, what were the previous costs, and was there actually real progress, and then compare it to Hearthstone, which is, I think, kind of the benchmark of a game that you want to compare your game against in terms of costs. So when I released the article, it was clearly really controversial, and I got a lot of really passionate responses, which I really enjoyed. But I really felt like I wasn't really understood very clearly. There were a few points in it that I glossed over, in my effort to try and get out my update as quickly as possible. Members of the community not understanding all of the backstory, but also part of that was my failure to communicate all the ideas and articulate things clearly. So I thought that I would then take this opportunity to really try and set the record straight and give a more complete and detailed view of my opinions of where things are right now and how they might change going forward. So, first off, in this video, I want to spend a little bit of time introducing people to the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, if anybody's not familiar with it. And I'm also kind of reviewing some of the details of it that are important and will come up again and again over the course of the video. If you're familiar with it, I actually encourage you to stay with this, because I'm going to be adding in a few subjective points of what this might mean for the players. So but don't skip ahead even if you are familiar with this. Next, I'm going to explain the old system and what the particular conversion rates that would be expected there meant in terms of collection building. And then I'm going to take the new system, compare it to the old system, and compare it to Hearthstone. And then after all this, I'm going to provide a little bit of analysis, and this particularly where I'm going to be talking about the events, which is a new addition to the game that has been very controversial. There's a bunch of links below that give a bunch of the background information about my opinions on economics, my work on previous things. I'm not going to be able to repeat all of that groundwork and all of that background. You're going to have to take it for granted for me in here because I can't kind of repeat all of my methodology for all of my different analysis there. So please go check it out, and there's also a few useful information. So I'm going to be focusing in the video really talking about the conclusions from those works rather than the details of the mathematics and how I arrive at those numbers. So, with that, let's talk about the basics of the Magic the Gathering Arena economy. The objective, really, of the structure of the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, as I understand it, is to try to develop an economy that doesn't use a dust-style system. The dust-style system was obviously originally pioneered by Hearthstone, but there are a lot of other games that have adopted some version of the dust system in their economics. So how does this work? First off, the basics of the economy are actually fairly normal. You do daily quests. You have daily win rewards. This gives you gold, which you can then use to buy packs. Also, you have a weekly pack prize for winning your fifth 10th and 15th game of the week. Bit of an unusual choice in terms of it's not typical with other card games, but this is another way to get cards into the hands of players. So how then do you deal with, for instance, extra cards, or how do you get cards that you don't just open in packs? So how it works is when you open packs, you have a chance to open what are called wild cards. Wild cards are these special cards that you can then transform into any card of that rarity that you like. So if you open a mythic rare wild card, you can turn this into any mythic rare that you want. And you have a chance to open these in all of the packs that you open. Whenever you open a pack, you also charge something that's called the Vault, which is a special apparatus that charges up to then spit out more of these wild cards. Another function of the Vault is that any of your unwanted cards or the cards that rather you have 5 or more copies of, are put into the Vault. It's not like one of the specific differences compared to other games is you cannot just put in a rare that you don't want, an uncommon that you don't want into the Vault and then turn it into wild cards. You have to specifically fill up on having 4 copies of a given card, and then the extra copies will be going into the Vault. With that said, I want to spend a few moments talking about the difference between structure and cost. Structure, I'm talking about the organization of the economy in terms of how well does it carry out the job of being a good digital card game economy, and cost is going to be how much investment does it take. So I'll use an example of comparing making pizza at home versus ordering pizza. It's a lot of work to make pizza at home. You have to buy the ingredients, cut them up, cook the pizza properly, etc. So it's a really inconvenient process. But the cost relatively is going to be lower than if you're buying it from getting it delivered to your house. Now, alternatively, if you're getting pizza delivered to your house, it's actually very easy to do. You can do this really quickly, but the cost is going to be higher as a function of this. So it's just this separating of the ideas of there are structural elements of how easy it is to navigate the system versus the actual investment that's necessary to achieve your goal. In digital card games, though, there's costs of 2 types. There's the cost of real-life money, where you just throw your wallet at the screen and buy decks that way, or you can just play a lot and build up your collection that way. And different games actually have different advantages and disadvantages in terms of how much it costs in terms of money and how much it costs in terms of effort. Let's talk about Hearthstone as an example for this. These 3 different concepts of structure, monetary cost, and free-to-play cost. I actually think that as much criticism as Hearthstone gets in terms of its economy, the actual structure of the economy is magnificent. It's a really wonderful, streamlined game design, very intuitive, and I think it's really, really rewarding and really, really fun. I'm not going to go to the details of describing how it works. I think a lot of you probably know that already, but you can check out some of my other articles to understand that. But yes, the structure of the Hearthstone economy is great. What about the monetary costs? What if you're just buying decks into Hearthstone? It's actually about average compared to other games offerings in the digital card game space. It's honestly pretty average, maybe a bit above average in terms of costing a bit more than what the other ones do, but it's not totally outside as an outlier. Finally, let's talk about it as a free-to-play game. How much time does it take you to get good decks? How much does it really reward you for just grinding up and building up your collection in that way? Hearthstone sucks, straight up. It's really, really bad. You have to put in a lot of hours, and you definitely have to be, you probably have to be pretty good at Arena in order to progress in the game in terms of collection building. Once again, links below. I'm not going to go through the details of how I got these numbers, because you should just go through and check my maths in some of my previous articles, because I don't have the time to kind of describe all of that right now. So let's talk about the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, just from the focus of the structure, and we're going to do a good old-fashioned pros and cons analysis. So the pros of the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, first is it encourages players not to just cannibalize their collections by throwing everything they can into the vault just to get that last rare they need for their deck. The Magic the Gathering Arena devs have said that really they want to encourage people to have a broader collection and actually keep around their cards to be used in different applications rather than just grinding them all up to make the one competitive deck. It also tries to avoid buyer's remorse and quote unquote, where you're forced to grind up all of these cards that you don't that you think that you don't need, but then maybe you need them again later. So that's going to be a kind of a frustrating element of the game and can be a pretty negative experience for the user. And then there's also, it allows for these hype moments when you open a wild card, because obviously opening a mythic wild card or a rare wild card is a blast, because it allows you to put it into your deck and get anything that you want. Let's talk about the cons though. First off, this is brutal for new players. One of the things that the most new players do in most games is they take all of the cards that they don't need, that they get in their starting collection, they grind it all up and be like, yeah, I'm just going to put this all into getting my very first competitive deck. By having a structure of the economy that doesn't allow you to do this, it's going to be really punishing for new players. There's also some elements of it that are pretty unclear about how they work and how they operate. One of the particular ones that I know many players are really concerned about is how rotation works. Because if you can't grind up old cards and turn them into new cards, then anything that you had from your collection that goes through rotation is just wiped out in terms of value. Now, the Magic the Gathering Arena devs have said this might be something that they're going to address and find some way to compensate for, but as of right now, there is no mechanism for addressing this. I'd also like to point out as a con that I don't think that this avoids buyer remorse pro is particularly convincing. In some respects, yes, it's true that grinding up a card that then you want later on is a form of buyer's remorse, but imagine that you spend a wild card to make a deck that a card that you want, and then you later on open up that exact same card. That's buyer's remorse too. That's like the same phenomenon. There are a lot of these ways in which I don't think that the structure of the economy really avoids all of the feel bad moments that are possible but like for instance, one of the ones that I point out in one of my articles is every rare and mythic that you open that isn't part of a constructed viable deck is kind of worth nothing to you, as opposed to worth a little bit of something. It's actually kind of just worth nothing at all, which is frustrating. And then also finally, it's just extremely inflexible, and switching from deck to deck is really kind of punished because you can't grind up old things if that's something that you want to do. You're really stuck with the things that you have. Building a specific deck that you have in mind is kind of punished. It's not designed to say, here, do whatever it is that you want, compared to a lot of other games which are saying you can take these cards, grind them out, and do what you want with them. So given all of this, I am a strong believer that the cons of this economy greatly outweigh the pros. I really do not think that the vault wild card arrangement is anywhere near as good as the arcane dust arrangement that you see in Hearthstone. And there's been no changes to this yet. This is something that's going to be continuous through all of this. This underlying structure to the economy has been the same from the moment they announced it until today. And I don't think that that's been improved. And none of these problems have been addressed in a way that I think is meaningful. So that's bad. So from the structure side of things, I just don't like the Magic the Gathering Arena economy. So now let's spend some time talking about the post-NDA economy in terms of now the costs that are associated with it. Now that we've gotten the structural side of it sorted, we're going to be focusing on the costs and the investments that are necessary to build decks. Every day you'd be getting about 650 gold between quests and daily game rewards, game win rewards. You would also get a number of individual card rewards that were called. So it would be some random commons, uncommons, and you can get rares. You can also have a low chance, but you had a chance of upgrading to higher rarity cards as well. I didn't get ever good numbers on this, but it's something that you could do. You would also get 3 packs per week from these, the 5th, 10th, and 15th win, as I mentioned before. And then in terms of filling the vault, it would take between 16 and 18 packs for the vault to open, and this would happen about once every 14 to 18 days. And from this, you would get 1 mythic, 1 rare, 1 uncommon, all just random cards, and then 2 uncommon wild cards and 1 rare wild card. It would be the payouts there. With this, in my last article on the subject, not the one from just a couple days ago, but from back in March, I did an analysis of the MTGA economy. I want to lay out the assumptions that I made there. First off, there would be about a 20% chance of opening a wanted rare. And what I term by wanted rare is the combined possibility of opening a rare wild card and a rare that you actually wanted. This is designed to be a very forgiving assumption, given the fact that, as you'll see, I was pretty brutal on the Magic the Gathering Arena economy, but so I wanted to give some pretty forgiving assumptions here. So 20% chance of opening a rare that you wanted, or a wild card rare. There would be a 10% chance of opening a wanted mythic. Same logic applies. There'd also be a 10% chance of opening an unwanted mythic. This would be something that would go into the vault, of course. You owned 100% of commons and uncommons in your collection in terms of charging the vault and also building decks. Finally, I assume that all unwanted cards went into the vault and that you opened no unwanted rares and mythics that didn't go directly in the vault. This is an entirely unrealistic assumption that was extremely forgiving for Magic the Gathering Arena, but as you'll see, it actually doesn't make that big of a difference in overall collection growth. We'll see down the line in a little bit. There was also something of a hidden assumption that I didn't clarify in the piece, and I'd like to speak to right now, and that's the idea that all of the wanted cards are going to be going into the same deck. This is the idea that I assumed that you were going to be opening some amount of wanted playable cards in the course of your pack openings, but those are more likely going to be in different decks. There's some cards for control decks, some cards for aggro decks, rather than being all together for one deck. This idea of collection management and moving towards decks that you want is actually quite hard when you have an inflexible economy like this, because you have to account for opening the cards that you want to at least a certain degree. So the conclusions that I came to when I did this analysis, first off, this is what your collection progression would look like over the course of 100 days. By day 100, you would have approximately 35 wanted rares and about 15 or 16 wanted mythics. Now, if you didn't like my assumption about all of these unwanted rares and mythics going into the vault, you can just follow these dotted lines, actually, in this version of the graph, and you'll see that they made a very small difference in the overall progression. So the number of mythics that you would have in your collection was virtually unchanged, and the number of rares would be the difference between 32 to 35 is kind of the gap between, or like 4 or 5 rares in the course of that time. So that's assuming that all of the rares that are non-playable rares that you open over a course of 100 days go into the vault. This is the difference it would make, and it'd be about 3 or 4 wanted rares, so not a particularly large impact. Now, I also did a bit of an assumption if you played really hard at the game and you open a lot of commons as a result of playing more, and this made a pretty small difference in your income as well, because you got some individual card rewards, and they weren't particularly rewarding. This is an important graph because it allows us to compare the cost of different decks in terms of how long they take. I did some research as to the typical deck costs that you can find a lot of this in Magic the Gathering Goldfish, MTG Goldfish. I'm sure many of you know. You can see budget decks. You typically required something like 12 rares, maybe a handful of mythic rares, so you could usually assemble a deck like this by about day 35 of playing. A mid-level deck, mid-level expense deck would take something like 60 days or 2 months to be able to assemble. Expensive decks be closer to 70 or so days, maybe 80 days, depending on the specific deck. But this was typical of what I saw looking at deck lists that were readily available at the time. Now, I also did a little bit of analysis of assuming that packs cost $1 each, and this is kind of what that same graph would look like if you're focusing on dollars as opposed to days. So about $50 for a budget deck, and a bit under $100 for a expensive deck, and that was something that was based on the projection that packs might cost about $1 each. The next part of the project was to compare the cost of Magic the Gathering Arena to other popular digital card games. Eternal is the game that I consider the gold standard of free-to-play card games. It isn't necessarily the best across the board at all of the facets of free-to-play card games, but I think that if you look at it as a totality, it's a very good free-to-play experience. And you can read some of my other articles for how I came to those conclusions. To grind up a competitive deck in Eternal, it takes about 15 to 40 days of regular play, and then about $50 to $100 if you're looking to just buy a competitive deck. That 15 to 40 days is much better than what you see in a lot of other games. The $50 to $100 is a little bit better than what you see in other games, but it's definitely better than what you see in some others. So this is why I consider it the best in class. Hearthstone, on the other hand, is not necessarily the best, but it's clearly the biggest competition because it's the biggest free-to-play, quote-unquote, game for card games on the internet. It takes about 35 to 140 days to grind up a competitive Hearthstone deck if you're playing entirely free-to-play. This was the figure that I calculated at the time, and about $40 to $140 if you're just looking to buy a competitive deck by purchasing packs. It should be noted, though, that when I did this analysis for this particular article, there was an unusual bias in the economy where there were several cheap decks that were close to the top and performing quite well. So these numbers aren't actually quite typical of what you see for Hearthstone. What I would say are closer to typical for Hearthstone would be between 70 and 140 days of grinding and between $70 and $140. Approximately. These were not the numbers that I used in this particular article and this particular analysis. The numbers that I did use were closer to 35 to 140 days and $40 to $140. So this is why I consider Hearthstone not a good free-to-play experience, largely on behalf of how difficult it is to build decks playing entirely free-to-play. If you compare these numbers, though, to what you saw for Magic the Gathering Arena, 35 to 70 days, it's kind of similar to Hearthstone. And this is with very generous assumptions. As I mentioned, that when I did this analysis with Hearthstone, the analysis was, the assumptions were much less generous, much more rigorous. And even then, Magic the Gathering Arena came out in approximately the same band of cost. The cost of decks was something like $45 to $95 as well, which once again is kind of in the same range that you saw with these decks in Hearthstone at that time. So that means Magic the Gathering Arena roughly in the same camp as Hearthstone, which is really bad because there are a lot of people who are very unhappy with Hearthstone about how bad their free-to-play economy is and don't think that it's sufficiently generous. One thing that I should note, though, that's important in this is that shortly after this happened and the backlash to this stingy economy really took place, Wizards instituted a mechanism of giving free packs to people every Friday. And then you get these 3 packs a week, basically as a gift to help offset the current structure of the economy and compensate for not having everything in place yet. Now, when this happened, I actually already thought that this was a huge mistake for them to do this, and I'll explain why. the the if you give something to somebody, if you're you're giving it a habit of giving something to somebody, and then you stop doing it, if you stop handing it out to people, they actually begin to feel like you're stealing from them. They had earned this, and this was a part of the game that they were expecting, and now it's gone. So you're taking something away from them now. And the way in which Wizards rolled out this 3 packs per week bonus packs made it sound like they were saying this is going to be more or less part of the economy moving forward, but we're putting this in as a stopgap for now. In reality, the way people, what they might have meant by this is, we are giving you a gift for right now to maybe jumpstart the economy, and we're going to stop doing that at some point in the future. So these weren't in the model when I was doing the original work, because it was something that was this weird, like, yeah, we'll have this for a while, we don't really know what we're doing with it. Like, it wasn't, it was clear that it wasn't designed to be a permanent fixture of the economy. I did do a brief analysis on what would it look like under that system, and we're going to be returning this later, but you can kind of see these pictures of between 27 and 53 days-ish to get a deck. And these numbers, I think, will kind of haunt Wizards going forward. So now let's talk about the May/Dominaria update to the economy, because there were a number of big changes that were announced just recently. Summarizing what this means for the data economy, your daily income increased to about 1,175 gold per day-ish. The daily card rewards that you would get from winning the individual card rewards, those were gone. Those were removed as sort of a compensation for getting a lot more gold, almost double as much gold, it should be noted, but no individual card rewards. The 3 packs per week for the 5th, 10th, and 15th win, they're still there. Opening the vault was actually a lot harder under this system in terms of the number of packs that you had to open. It was closer to 30 packs that you had to open. But you would actually take about roughly the same amount of time to do it, because you're just opening a lot more packs. The rewards for the vault also changed. Those individual card rewards for the 1 mythic, the 1 rare, and the 1 uncommon, those were removed. And instead, the rewards for the vault were 2 uncommon, 2 rare, and 1 mythic rare wild card. So that was actually a really big improvement to the overall haul from the vault. Harder to fill up in terms of number of packs, about the same amount of time to open it as before, and the rewards were increased. They also introduced a system where you could buy packs with real money. The conversion ended up being about $1 a pack, which is what I expected in my previous article. The conversion's a little bit more complicated than that, because it's hard to buy just packs directly with money. So go into the announcements link below to find the details about that. So for the this release that I had, this article that I had a couple days ago, let's go through the assumptions. First off, there was a 13.3% chance of opening a rare wild card. I got this number from the pity timers that they have in the game. A pity timer is how long do you go without opening a wild card before it guarantees you the chance of opening a wild card. And the pity timer number for rare wild cards was every 15 packs. You go 15 packs without opening a rare wild card, they guarantee you a rare wild card. I just took this number and said, okay, let's assume that the rare wild card drop rate is about twice this. Same goes for Mythic Rare. The pity timer there was once every 30 packs, which would be about 3.33%. So I just doubled that to 6.666%. I then came up with the numbers of a 6.2% chance of opening a wanted rare and a 1.4% chance of opening a wanted mythic. How I came up with these numbers would be a little bit more controversial, but I basically picked out a handful of decks from MTG Goldfish, found out how many different rares and mythics were in these decks, and performed some calculations to estimate the likelihood of opening one of these decks. Now, once again, this is kind of using the assumption that a lot of these wanted cards are going into the same deck that you're opening, that playable cards that you're opening are going into the same deck, which doesn't exactly hold up in reality, but this is kind of the constraint of a nature of a economy that doesn't have a lot of flexibility built into it. I also assumed that you had 100% of commons and uncommons in terms of building decks. I just kind of didn't count that and didn't pay attention to it. This assumption really simplifies things. I don't have to track all of the different card types. The only card types that really matter for building top tier decks are rares and mythics, so I just focused on those. And then I assumed that nothing went into the vault outside of the charge that you get from opening packs themselves. This is actually a pretty accurate assumption, given the fact that you have to open just an incredible number of cards in order to reliably be putting cards into the vault, and the value of each individual card that goes into the vault is really quite low. So basically the majority of the charge of the vault has been always just opening packs and getting the bonus charge from opening the packs. Once again, I sort of made this assumption that all the wanted cards go into the same deck, and that this is addressed in some of the later parts of the presentation, that if you don't like this assumption, I kind of took it out in some of the calculations as well. First off, using those numbers, what is our mythics and rares per pack, and how long does it take us to get to those amounts? And you see here roughly this formula. After 100 or so packs, you're able to have about 26 rares and about 12 mythic rares. This is also reflects the cost in real cash money to get any of these amounts. Approximately, the cost of every pack is about $1. If you wanted to get a sense of how much this costs in terms of deck building, I pulled up some specific decks for the article: a white-blue auras deck, a black-blue control deck, a mono-green monument deck, and a mono-red aggro deck, and put these on the lines. So you can see here that the cost to build a deck is about $60 to $100. And I should note that that's actually more dictated by the rares and getting enough rares compared to the mythics. And this will be something that comes up as a theme moving forward. Now, how long does it take to build a competitive deck in terms of just playing free-to-play using this set of assumptions? You can see a chart here that follows those functions. Once again, I added on deck archetype costs onto here, so you can see that it'll take about 35-ish days to get this white-blue auras deck, which is on the cheaper end, and it'll take you about 55 days or so to get the mono-red deck, which was the most expensive deck that I looked at. So those are those numbers. So how does this compare to the other games? Eternal, as I mentioned, as the Destiny class, these were the costs that were associated with it. Hearthstone is the game, our nemesis that we're trying to defeat and beat. And given this, I think that MTGA fit pretty closely in between this. It was the decks took longer than Eternal but shorter than Hearthstone consistently, and the cost of the decks was pretty even between the three, with Eternal being a little bit better than Arena and Arena being barely better than Hearthstone. So given this, I really felt that Magic the Gathering Arena was a little bit better than Hearthstone. Not by a lot, but it was better. Now, I want to address this assumptions that I made about opening wanted cards and the idea that these would all be going into the same deck. I understand that this assumption wasn't particularly fair, so I wanted to perform a little bit of an analysis that focuses on what happens if you never open cards that you want, or that you're a really hyper-picky deck builder and there's only specific types of decks that you want to build. So I'm calling this the never lucky or picky deck builder phenomenon, which was recalculating the numbers, taking out the chances of opening a playable rare or mythic rare outside of wild cards. Given this, these quantities, we had a graph that looks like this in terms of costs for money and packs, which means that the decks would cost something between $75 and $120. Using this set of assumptions. And if you looked at grinding it out in the free-to-play model, it would take something between 45 and 75 days to reach a competitive deck. Once again, these numbers are kind of in the middle between these two games. Still definitely better than Hearthstone, not by as much of a margin as we saw before. The cost, is in terms of money, is now much closer to that of Hearthstone, which is noteworthy. But as I sort of mentioned, Hearthstone's money cost of buying decks is not outrageous relative to other games that are on the market. So the major criticism of Hearthstone is about their free-to-play economy, which on that metric, MTGA is still beating Hearthstone at. So with all of that, why am I doing this video? Why am I repeating myself? All these things. There's a few things that I wanted to address in this, and are important, I think, to clarify in really what I'm suggesting in all of this. One of the most common criticism in the response that I saw to this article was that I wasn't comparing to the economy, bringing in those 3 packs per week. Definitely, the new economy is worse than the previous economy if you count in those 3 packs. The question is, what do you count those 3 packs as? Were they a gift to players to jumpstart their collections, or was this intended to be a part of the fabric of the economy moving forward? I think that the statements from Magic the Gathering Arena devs have been a little bit inconsistent in this regard, so this is the reason why I didn't focus on it in this analysis. But as I said before, I still think that those were a huge mistake to give out in the way that they did, and they should have made it very clear that they were a gift if they didn't plan to follow up the economy with that level of impact. And it's just clear as day to me doing this analysis that the current economy is not as generous as the previous one, bringing in those 3 packs per week. And I'll agree with anybody who said that. Next, there was some feedback that my deck choices that I was using for the example decks of budget and mid-range, middling and expensive decks weren't exactly fair. So somebody on Discord reached out to me and pointed this out, and I said, hey, just do this analysis and find me numbers that make sense to you. Like, what would you say are the fair numbers for a budget deck and a high tier luxury deck? And the numbers that I got is that the most expensive decks probably have closer to about 30 rares as opposed to 24, which is what I was assuming before. But actually the cost of the budget decks went down slightly, where the number of rares required to build a competitive but budget deck was closer to 12 as opposed to 16. The next factor is actually that there was just a big surge of pack openings that happened. With this money economy coming into the game, there were a bunch of people who, of course, dropped $100, $200, $500 on the game, and this now gives us data to work with of how much do packs give out in terms of mythic rares, wild cards of different types. So that was really, really useful. I got about 1,700 packs worth of data from people, and this data is excluding the vaults results. Because if you're opening, for instance, 100 packs or 90 packs rather, you would open the vault 3 times based on all the charges that you get from that. I was just looking at what is the drop rate of mythics, rare wild cards, mythic rare wild cards from the packs themselves rather than from the vault. So with that, let's get into the numbers. Mythics dropped about 15.8% of the time from a pack. Rare wildcards dropped about 11.8% of the time from a pack. And mythic rare wildcards dropped about 5.2% from packs. The rare and mythic rare wildcard numbers were a little bit lower than what I had anticipated. I was actually kind of surprised by how close my estimates were, but it definitely is lower than what I had guessed. The mythic number, though, is actually slightly higher than what I had anticipated. I had guessed that the number would be closer to 10%, and it's substantially higher than that, actually. The Of the numbers, though, that I did, the one that I'm the least confident about is the Mythics number. There were a number of the responses that I got that didn't have the total Mythics number that they opened. They just had the rare and Mythic rare wildcard numbers that were open, which is fine, but I think that it's close to this number. I had enough results in here to be confident in this moving forward. So given these numbers, what is the actual cost of building these decks? I think that it's actually going to be closer to 35 to 85 days to build a competitive deck under these conditions. And the monetary cost is going to be closer to $55 to $135, given this set of assumptions openings. Once again, this is pretty in the middle between Hearthstone and Eternal, where most decks are going to take longer in Magic the Gathering Arena to make, and are going to be cheaper than in Hearthstone to make in terms of the time that's required to do it, and then also the costs are a little bit better in Hearthstone, in Arena as well. Once again, I wanted to address the never lucky / picky deck builder set of assumptions, which is this idea that you actually never open a card that you want. Those calculations I just showed you assume that you still had a chance of opening rares and mythics that were playable and putting those into your decks. This is now assuming that you are never opening a card that you want outside of wild cards. How does the cost shake out now? Once again, it seems like Arena is right in between Eternal and Hearthstone. The cost in terms of the days investment is 40 to 100 days approximately, $65 to $165. The top end is higher now because our definition of the most expensive decks has broadened a little bit. If you look at these, it seems as if Arena is better than Hearthstone in terms of the days invested, the free-to-play economics of it. The cost in terms of paying out of pocket for a deck is actually about the same, about equivalent. As I mentioned before, though, the main sin of Hearthstone has always been around its free-to-play economics relative to other card games on the market. In terms of its cost of buying into the game and paying your way through expansions, I don't think that it's that unusual compared to the other games that are available. You can ask yourself about whether or not you think it's a reasonable number, but that's kind of a separate question. This, though, begs the question of which of these two sets of numbers, of the never lucky a set of assumptions, which are the ones that are on the right, versus the assuming that you open rare cards that are interesting to you and you put them in decks that they're the lower numbers on the left, which of these set of assumptions is the better ones to use for it? And it really actually depends on the player. If you're somebody who's opens a set of packs and says, hey, I opened a bunch of mono white cards in my Dominaria pack, I'm going to continue opening Dominaria packs because I know that there are History of Benalia, Benalish Marshals, and stuff like that in those packs. I think that those numbers on the left are going to be more representative of you. If you're somebody, though, who says, I am a mono white player, I will open packs until I get a mono white deck together, regardless of whether the things that I am opening look like I should be building something else, those numbers on the right are going to be a little bit better for you. I'm going to be using these numbers on the right moving forward and doing some final analysis because it feels like the people response would rather that I focus on this style of calculation, though both of them have their value, I think. So, there are a few questions I actually can't really answer related to this, and because they're just outside of the realm of calculations and mathematics. For instance, is $65 to $165 for a deck for a card game online acceptable? Is that a realistic number that people should be expected to pay? That's more up to you and people more broadly. I can really only tell you how it compares to other games. Compared to other games, this is not that unusual. Whether you think that that's a reasonable number or not for yourself, that's a different question, and I can't really tell that for you. Second, 40 to 100 days. Is this a reasonable amount of time to spend in grinding decks? Like once again, I think that this is kind of similar to what you see generally within the field. It's still not the best of the entire field, and that hasn't changed, but it is typical, and you have to decide whether that's a reasonable number for you in terms of a time investment. There are also some questions I can't really answer in terms of calculations because they are just so much more difficult to calculate, such as how much does it cost to maintain a collection on Magic the Gathering Arena. The reason that I have focused on the costs to build a deck from scratch, starting off from a zero collection, is that this is numbers that I can focus on. I can just say this is the drop rate of rares, is the drop rate of wild cards, and say, like, okay, so this is how long it's going to take you to build a deck that you want. What does a collection look like over the course of a year? What does the average collection look like over the course of a year? Somebody who's a devoted, mono white player, like I mentioned, might be able to say, like, yeah, I'm sticking with the same deck the entire time. Somebody who's interested in switching around from deck to deck and have a bit more diversity, that's going to cost something different. And I especially can't do this comparison between different games because there's just very different schedules. Also, there are a number of people who brought up the question of rotation. I understand that rotation is a concern for players. Apparently, the devs are working on some plan to get around the challenges related to rotation, but I don't know what it is. Obviously, if your collection's value is kind of being wiped out by rotation, that really, really sucks, and I hope that that's not the case, but that's one of the constraints. I still want to emphasize, though, all of this conversation, I'm saying, like, yeah, the economy has improved, it's not great, but it's mediocre. This is all just talking about the costs. The structure still sucks. And there's been no improvements from the time that I wrote articles back in January saying that it had these problems, and I'm not saying that those downsides that are a function of the structure are in any way, shape, or form remedied. I also want to emphasize that there are certain things about games I can't really compare. So, for instance, when people say to me things like, well, Magic has 4 set releases per year and Hearthstone has 3, doesn't that mean that Magic the Gathering Arena is going to end up being more expensive? It's hard to calculate maintaining a collection, and it's very hard to calculate how much it costs to maintain a collection. And there's also just to me like you'd be punishing Magic the Gathering for having too much content that it's releasing to you. It's giving you too many different cards to try out. So these are the sort of like the pros and cons that you get that are characteristic of different games and the different advantages that they offer that you can't really distill down to numbers to easily calculate. One particular commenter was bringing up the idea of renting decks as a way to lower your costs in Magic the Gathering Online, and it was not being offered in Magic the Gathering Arena, which was used as a proof that Magic the Gathering Arena is more expensive than Magic the Gathering Online. But it's a totally different way of collection management as a result of that, because, for instance, if you're renting decks for $20 a month for a year, that's $240 a year that you're spending on the game. How much could you get out of the game if you are spending $240 a year playing Magic the Gathering Arena? I think that you could maintain a couple of top-tier decks, especially if you're playing regularly. So it's just not a really fair comparison because the machinations of the economy are different, especially if you're talking about it over time. I can just tell you how much does it cost to build a deck from the ground up at the moment, and that's a different metric. Now let's talk about constructed events. This was probably the most controversial part of the entire announcement at the end of the day. So all of that other work was probably a little bit less contentious in this segment right here. This was discussed in the announcements. Go check out the links below to get the rundown of the price structure there. This is a graph that gives you your expected return of investment going into the events based on different win rates. You can see here that somebody who goes 50% win rate, so the average player, is going to have an 82% return of investment given the reward structure that they're using. The current reward structure strongly incentivizes players who have very high win rates to play a lot because they're able to get a lot out of the event. Players who aren't able to hang with it, though, are going to get pretty crushed and experience a pretty big loss of value. apparently the matchmaking in the events is going to be MMR based, as opposed to just based on record. There's not a lot of details in there. I haven't actually seen this officially in an announcement. This is just something that I saw from some people commenting in the various spaces. So it's really, really difficult to understand what that actually means in practicality, especially because we don't have the background numbers that the Magic the Gathering Arena devs have access to for the purposes of understanding how the matchmaking works. I'm going to kind of assume that it's possible for somebody to maintain fairly high win rates if they're assuming that they're good enough, and that they're not going to be totally flattened out as mono 50% win rates given a powerful matchmaking system. But this is just a really vague assumption that I can't really help. But anyway, the point is that somebody who's really skilled in the events can probably make a profit off of them, while somebody who's running at about a 50% win rate is or lower is going to be slowly losing value playing in these events. So in terms of what these events accomplish, I think that there were two goals that the Magic the Gathering Arena devs were focusing on when developing them and developing the prize structure. The first was giving an opportunity for advancement for the most skilled players, and then the second is giving players something to do after their fourth win of the day. On both of these counts, I actually think that the current system does succeed. It's obviously could be more generous. The EV is not very high, but on those bases, on those merits, if that was the purpose of it, it achieves it, and it gives the more skilled players something to do that they can try and improve their mettle and move forward in the game, with the possibility of being punished if they're not as good as they think they are. Now, how do the players respond to this, though? The first is they really picked up on this idea that the win rate at 50% was bad. It was a low EV event as a result of that, and that, I think, really angered the players for a couple of reasons. Just the idea of a negative EV event rubbed players the wrong way, which I think is a natural reaction. It's not what I was most fixated on when I personally saw this information, but I understand where the community is coming from. The second thing was back to these gift packs. Did these events replace gift packs as a method for collection advancement? And the answer is very clearly no, given the fact that it's negative EV. So when I was doing my analysis, was set not thinking about these events as a pack replacement for those 3 gift packs per week, because I had never considered those as being a real part of the economy. Players react differently, and I totally understand the logic as to why. This means that both of these scores of positive EV and replacing the gift packs, these events failed at, which explains why players were so outraged when they saw these events and felt like it wasn't good enough. Should also mention that individual card rewards are part of these events and were part of the payouts for it. That these were not particularly meaningful for players, especially given the fact that rares are not really worth very much to players. It's what rare wild cards that are worth something to players. So we'll just ignore that and leave that in terms of an element of the value. So let's talk about some solutions. What are some changes that can be made to Magic the Gathering Arena to get around some of these problems? Now, I want to mention, obviously, just make everything a ton more generous is a very easy way to fix all of the problems. And so I'm just trying to come up with some solutions that are not just greatly increase the total amount of cards that people are getting, because that's pretty easy to do. First off, I want to mention about a very weird challenge about mythics versus rares. In all of the calculations that I see, there's just so many more rares that you need in your decks compared to mythics, and this means often that rare wildcards are going to be the bottleneck, not mythic rare wildcards, to completing a deck. One of my suggestions is actually allowing players to convert a mythic rare wildcard into any rare card or rare wildcard if they like, and then you can use this to get any extra rares that you need for a deck. Under the current system, These are the costs that we determined. I think that if you made this change, the cost of the most expensive decks would drop to about $135 each and about 80 days of playtime each, which is a pretty important and pretty big buff. Another possibility is that you could just tune the drop rates of the different cards to different numbers to reflect this reality. Keep the drop rate of mythics at about 15%, decrease the drop rate of mythic rare wildcards to about 4%, and increase the rate of rare wildcards to about 15%. This is about a 1 to 1.5% drop in mythic rare drop rates and about a 3 to 4% increase in rare wildcard drop rates. Under these conditions, the cost of decks would go to about $55 to $140 each, or 35 to 85 days. This is the advantage of hitting both expensive decks and cheaper decks, while the other solution really just affects the more expensive decks, given how the structure of those decks ended up working out. If you did want to just be more generous, you could increase the drop rate of the rare wildcards to 20%. This would give you numbers like $45 to $115 for a deck, and then 30 to 70 days for a deck. In terms of the events, I think that there's ways to rejigger the prize structure so that it's positive EV for the players, but it doesn't also overwhelm the economy with gold. One of the things is that you could put a lot more of the rewards into card rewards or pack rewards as opposed to gold rewards. This is a particular example that I came up with very quickly. I'm not specifically advocating it, but when I did the math for this, it looked like the EV for 50% was just above even, just above coming out equal, but it still has the advantage of the best players advancing in their collection. Bad players are going to be coming out a little bit behind, but the average player is going to be coming out roughly equally to where they came out from. But the amount of gold in people's collections would actually fall more rapidly than we saw in the previous one, because people are kind of functionally buying packs with this, which I think is an attractive feature. Another possibility is you could just change the rewards from random rares to rare wildcards. As I mentioned, to keep again and again, this is the bottleneck of what keeps people from building the decks they want. So giving players a rare wildcard as a prize for the top placing. For instance, if you get 7 wins, you get 1 rare wildcard as opposed to 2 random rares. That I think would be very attractive to players and could convince them that it's worth the investment. You still have all of these things that you are able to, it's an opportunity to advance. It meets that goal. It meets the goal that WotC set out in terms of giving you an opportunity to grind and work hard to advance your collection. It meets the community's goal of having positive EV, but this still doesn't actually replace the gift packs that I was talking about before. So let's just talk about those to kind of close things out. What are we going to do with this? The thing is that they, as I mentioned, they were just a problem from the beginning, because I think that they were packaged wrong and sold wrong, or at least WotC misunderstood the way that it was being conveyed. I have 3 possible explanations as to sort of what's happened to the gift packs and what the future of them is. The first one is that they didn't understand the math that's going on with it. I think this is pretty unlikely, because there's enough intelligent people in the building to know that the new reward system and the new event system does not compensate for the old system before, given the packs that you're getting every week, the 3 packs per week. Number 2 is the possibility that they just miscommunicated, and that they wanted to have these as a gift to the community that was a temporary thing that they never intended to be permanent, and that they packaged the information in the way in which it seemed like they were intending this to be a core element of the economy, but that actually wasn't quite their intention. Third is that they're actually just kind of being a little bit dishonest with it, and that they really never intended
for this to be a part of the main economy, but they also knew that was the impression they were giving off. If I had to guess, I think that the number two is the most likely explanation, which is that they didn't know the messages that they were conveying, or maybe they changed their minds or something like this. This is a case of miscommunication. And if that's the case, they really need to tear it off like a band-aid. They really need to just kind of come out and say, we're sorry that you got this impression, and this is not what you're going to be getting moving forward. You shouldn't expect that level of rewards ever again. And if that's the case, that's fine. But they kind of have to just say that. Right now, they're sitting in this position where everybody thinks that they're supposed to be getting more than they are, and that WotC is just screwing them for some reason. And that kind of limbo, I think, is going to cause this ongoing, never-ending fight between the community and WotC about what to do with these packs. Just to conclude, I want to say again about how bad the structure of the economy is. I have not changed my opinion one bit as to the structure of the economy and how I think that wildcards and vaults just have all of these problems that are associated with them that kind of keep coming up in these calculations. I don't even think that fixing it with something like letting you throw your commons, uncommons, and your extra cards that you don't want into the vault helps at all, because the reward levels are just so meager. There is nothing that WotC has offered players yet as an explanation as to why the current system is actually better than a traditional crafting system. It just gives less flexibility, it hurts new players, etc. It was really interesting to me to see comments coming back from my article where I didn't address how bad the economy structure was in it, because this is something I talked about all of these problems in the first article that I wrote about this. This is back when we didn't even have the numbers yet. We just had the idea of the vault and the idea of wildcards that were described by WotC, and I kind of said, I think that it has all of these problems about new players, about being inflexible, not be able to change your decks, about rotations being really frustrating. And the way that I like it there is just use this as an example card of it. It was just something that I wasn't a fan of then, and it was really fascinating to see players and see passionate members of the community kind of complaining to me about these points and saying, like, you don't know about it, which I realized at the time was like, no, this is my fault for not explaining more clearly some of my premises, which is the reason why I decided to make this super long video. But thank you, though, for sticking with me as I did this. I especially want to point out a few people. Remora helped me with some information about my event EV calculations. I had made some minor mistakes there, and he helped me correct those. You had Wujo, who was helpful for getting new numbers for the budget and expensive decks, which were incorporated into this last half of the video that you just saw. And then Original MD, who has been a great advocate for the work that I've been doing and helping to spread it amongst the Arena community, as well as giving me a bunch of data and gathering and corralling a bunch of data related to pack openings to help me do some of my calculations. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate all of that. You can also comment on the Reddit thread that's associated with it. I try my best to get back to as many comments as possible. Obviously, when the threads kind of blow up, it's hard to get to everything, but I do my best. I really try and do my best to address as many concerns as I can. Comment as well. Comment in the section below, and I'd love to check out those. And then finally, you can check out the other work that I'm doing over at Artifact Academy, that I have a number of pieces that might be of interest to people not necessarily interested in Artifact itself, which is a game that I've been focusing on. But for instance, I have a article and video there that's associated with the work of Richard Garfield, who is an important figure in the history of Magic. And of course, make sure that you check out the links below for all of the detailed information, for instance, of how I did my calculations, and you can check out the original articles as well. Thanks again for coming to hang out. Talk to you all later.